One of the biggest news at this year's CES is that Sony has re-entered the OLED TV market. If you can remember, about 8 years ago, Sony had launched a really small screen, the XE-L1, which is 15 inches in screen size. But this time around, they are offering a screen size substantially much more living room friendly screen size of 55 inch, 65 inch, and 77 inch. And judging by these screen sizes alone, we know that Sony is likely to be using the OLED panel, the WRGB OLED panel from LG Display, who is really the only large screen size OLED panel vendor in the world anyway. Now, we have asked Sony to try and find out what's the peak brightness of their new OLED television, which is called the A1 series. And as usual, Sony refused to disclose any numbers, stating that numbers are not important. But from what we know from Panasonic's and LG's presentation, the peak brightness is likely to be the same because they're all using the same LG Display 2017 panel. So it's likely to end up about 800 nits at D65. Also, because of using this panel, there won't be 3D capability as well on the Sony A1 Bravia series of OLED TV. Now, the biggest news, feature on Sony's OLED television is, of course, their partnership, their hookup with Dolby Vision, for Dolby Vision support. The Sony television will support 3 HDR formats: HDR10, which will ship at launch, Dolby Vision, which will be firmware updated, and also HLG support for broadcast standard. Now, with the Dolby Vision as well, they will be retrospectively providing support to last year's Z9D and also the step-down X93E or X94E series as well. In terms of HLG, I think there's some good news for owners of last year's Sony Bravia televisions. Sony has just told us that the XD93 and the XD94 will be receiving HLG support, although the timeline remains unconfirmed. We tried to ask Sony about how Dolby Vision will interact with its X1 Extreme processing, because Sony is very particular about the X1 Extreme processor that is on board the Sony OLED. And what they are actually saying is that Dolby Vision obviously will have their own proprietary chip, but Sony is actually allowed to add its own processing source onto the Dolby Vision's algorithm as long as there's a picture mode that will actually preserve Dolby Vision's reference artistic intent standard. And that mode will likely be a Cinema Pro mode. In terms of design, Sony has really gone all out. You can see that the design is a one-slab design, which has no speakers or no accessories on the side or the bottom to actually detract from the picture itself. In fact, Sony has actually gone to the length of actually removing any Sony logo or Bravia labeling on the screen itself, which must have taken a lot of discussion between executives at the highest level. And you can see probably that, maybe not from this angle, but from the side angle, that it is actually tilted slightly backwards. The degree of tilting is about 5 degrees. And if you are actually wanting to put it on the table, or if you're actually wanting to put it on the floor, then the tilt is unavoidable. But there is a wall mount option. The stand can actually be pushed in to become a wall mount and be used with a VESA mount, and then you can actually position it straight flush with the wall by itself. One cool thing is that also concerns the sound. You can notice now that there is no speakers because of this one-slab concept design. What Sony has actually done is to actually put the speakers in the stand and then use the acoustic surface of the screen to vibrate and through a pair of transducers at the left and the right of the screen itself to provide good sound. We actually attended a demo of this feature on the Sony A1 series Bravia OLED television, and it's surprisingly effective. There was very good directionality. There was sufficient bass. I wouldn't say substantial. There was sufficient bass, and the resolution is not the best. But then again, you can't expect really soundbar or even separate speakers sound quality from such a thin panel. Right, let's talk about price and availability then. We try to ask Sony about these two aspects, and again, they are being very tight-lipped about the whole thing. But the screen will probably be available in the summer of 2017, and the price remains unconfirmed. Sony said that the financial situation with the currency fluctuation between the US and the Japanese yen market, they are going to monitor the market conditions before settling on the final price. But given the amount of features and given the amount of OLED panel, Dolby Vision, HLG, we don't really expect this TV to become as affordable as LG's offering. Also, one last point that we like to make is that we actually asked Sony whether they would position this A1 series OLED or the Z9D series as its flagship. And interestingly, what Sony is actually saying is that the Z9D can actually produce a better HDR performance. So they're actually pitching that as the best HDR television because of its sheer peak brightness. But the OLED will be better for most other conditions to provide a realistic, more especially in a dimly lit environment. Thank you, and this is Vincent Teo reporting from CES 2017 at Sony's show booth.